Relax, trust in the Most High, He got your back. Praying fast when you under attack.
It is a religious law, but we need to think of it as almost like a law of a country. And when you said that, all of a sudden, a lot of words in the Bible made more sense to me. And it just sort of, it's one of those things that, it takes away all the mystery,
Yes, once I started thinking like that, I'm telling you, the New Testament lit up. It just lit up with God's law everywhere, and things started making so much sense. I see the Bible as a law book. It's written in legal code. It's a book of law that a nation should use to follow. And we used to do that 200-300 years ago. Lawyers would write about it. They called it divine law. And until we go back to seeing it that way, I think some of these verses we're going to construe in a slightly different way. The way I would put it, we construe it in a religious way instead of a lawful way or a legal way. And that's what I'm trying to do, is just try to share the things I've learned that have opened my eyes to why God's law is so good for us today.
Now, you're a middle school teacher, and so today we want to teach the teachers, because our audience on Shabbat Night Live, there's some smart cookies, and they're trying to teach folks in their realms about what do we do with these difficult verses about believers obeying the law of God in the new covenant. So can you explain how we do this?
Sure. I titled this, Why Practice the Law in the New Testament? And when I first started believing this, it was clear some verses sounded like they were saying, oh, we should keep God's commandments. But then there were some that just didn't make sense. So what I wanted to do is go through some of those verses that clearly teach you should do this. You should keep God's commandments, because those verses are irrefutable. They directly say you should keep God's commandments. The other verses that are often cited off point and out of context, when you really study them, they don't say what we think they say. And we use them by citing one verse. Wow, when you get the context, it doesn't say that at all. We mentioned, Acts chapter 10, which is one I'm not coming to in a minute. That sheet of all the unclean animals to eat, the interpretation's given for us. Peter gave us the interpretation, and it's not go ahead and eat.
Right. If we just go ahead and read the verses after that, we'd get that.
Yes, and that's the way a lawyer would study and prepare for trial. You're not going to use, that's called off point. If it's off point, if the point is not about what you're talking about, you can't even consider it for that topic. So if we're talking about dietary laws, you would never be able to consider Acts chapter 10, because that's about racial discrimination. And no judge would ever let it into evidence. Yet we do it all the time when we're studying the scripture. And I wanted to just look at that today, if you don't mind.
Please.
So, the next few verses, he says, whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Our Messiah is brilliant. He put it right in the right context. It's sanctification. The law is not for justification. It's for sanctification. We're justified by the death, burial, and resurrection of the Messiah. We're sanctified by being obedient to his commandments. Over and over again through the Torah, sanctification is obedience to the law. The New Testament is the same thing. Justification the law does not say it's for our justification. It's only for our sanctification.
So sanctification is an ongoing process. Justification was one and done.
Yes. One of my slides, and we're not going to get to it, says there's three parts to salvation: justification, sanctification, and glorification. We're justified when we put our faith in the Messiah, the death, burial, and resurrection. We're acquitted. It's over. Sin forgiven. Now from that point, we need to walk in God's commandments. That's sanctification. When we die, we're going to be given a resurrected body. That's glorification. We'll be just like him. Our sin problem's over. We've got a new body. We're a new person. We don't have that race we've been running. We've succeeded. We're there. And that's the three-part process to salvation. The law is in sanctification. We need to run that race and learn how to keep God's commandments. That's what we're trying to do.
It's not like going to
few more verses that the Messiah said. If you keep my commandments, you shall abide in my love. Over and over again, he said it. If you love me, keep my commandments. John 14:15. Then the apostle said also, the apostle Paul, and he's the one that gets misconstrued all the time, but how would he have said stuff like, wherefore the law is holy and the commandment holy and just and good? if it's bad for us. Now, the penalties might be bad for us, but he's talking about the book of the law here. And the penalties really aren't bad for us. It's to correct our course. That's what it is. Romans 2:13 says, for not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. Faith requires obedience. Did you really believe if it didn't change who you are? Right? You have to actually believe. There was a story we used to share. I used to go with a street witnessing group, and we'd talk about faith and how it changes you. We never applied it to the law, but we just applied it to it needs to change you. And it was this story of, let's say this guy's walking a tightrope over the Grand Canyon. He says, hey, how many of you guys think I can go across the Grand Canyon? Everyone raises their hand and says, yeah, I can go across. You go across and come back. And everyone cheers, says, wow, that was awesome. How many of you guys think I can go across with this wheelbarrow? Everyone raises their hand and says, yeah, I think you can go across and come back. Everyone's cheering. That was amazing. I can't believe you made it. How many of you guys think I can go across with a person in the wheelbarrow? Everyone says, yeah, I think you can do it. Okay, who's coming? Not a hand raised. Who believed?
Good one. Yes.
Finally, one kid says, I'll do it, runs up and jumps in the wheelbarrow and says, let's go. Who believed? That one kid believed because it produced actions. It produced fruit. The works of the laws, James. Faith without works is dead. Everyone else had dead faith. They really didn't believe it. They just wanted to see it. But that one kid, he had faith that, yeah, I think you could do it, and I'm going to prove it by my actions. And that's what faith is. We missed that second part. That's what James is talking about. So that's what Paul means, for not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law are just before God. It doesn't exclude faith. You started with faith. He goes on to say, what shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. I think we talked about this one also. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? What then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law, but under grace? God forbid. Well, what is the definition of sin? John says it's breaking God's commandments. For sin is the transgression of the commandment. So read that again. What shall we say then? Shall we continue breaking God's law that grace may abound? God forbid. He's directly saying we shouldn't keep breaking God's law. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law, but under grace? God forbid. Under the law means under the curse of the law. I'm not under the United States Code right now. If I drive home and I get a ticket, now I'm under the United States Code. I have a penalty to pay. That's the difference. We owe a penalty we can't pay. Under the law is under the penalties. We're no longer under the penalties. Christ, the Messiah, got rid of those for us.
The law is still there.
The book of the law is still there.
Yep.
The Messiah's brother James said too over and over again, and we're going to look at this now because I can't believe I used to miss this all the time. But be ye doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving your own self. For if any be a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like unto a man beholding his natural face in a mirror. For he beholds himself and goes his way, and straightway forgets what manner of man he was. But whoso looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues therein. So we're supposed to look into God's perfect law of liberty and continue in it. He being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. What is the work James is talking about? Clearly, it's keeping the law. We sit there and think, oh, faith without works. Well, he's not talking about the works of the law. He's talking about just being a good person. No, he's all through the book of James. He's talking about the works of the law.
And the perfect law of liberty is that new law that Jesus gave us after he resurrected. What is that?
I haven't found it yet. I've been looking for it. I have not found that new law.
Yeah, I know. Apparently the law, the Torah, gives us liberty.
It's freedom.
It's freedom. The law is freedom.
Yeah, it absolutely is. That's why it's called. Well, just think about what happened at the Exodus. We're going to take you out of bondage and bring you to my law. We're leaving bondage and we're going to what James called the perfect law of liberty. It's freedom. Laws transgressors. For whosoever shall keep the whole law. I was surprised at this when I actually shared this at a Bible study I'm part of a few Tuesdays ago. it says the exact opposite of what we think. For whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. I used to say that all the time. See, we don't need to keep it. If you just break one, you're guilty. All that matters, you're guilty of all of it, so who cares?
Right.
That's kind of what I used to think.
It's impossible, so why try?
Yeah, and he goes on though, the very next verse, for he that said, do not commit adultery, said also, do not kill. Now, if thou commit no adultery, yet if thou kill, you are become a transgressor of the law. So speak and so do as they that shall be judged by the law of liberty. We're going to be judged by this law as to whether we're keeping it or not. The truth is, the only way we can keep it is something called faith. You got to really believe it. And I know you've been through this. Once I believed these dietary laws are good for me. I know I keep using that example. That's a big one for most people. They're good for me. Now I just want to do it. My faith, I want to do it. I can't wait till I can start keeping those.
It becomes a part of you.
Yeah, now as I read God's law, there's another one I'm not doing. I got to figure out how to do this one. And now I want to learn that one and start being obedient. That's what sanctification is. Even so, faith, he finishes, if it has not works, is dead, being alone. What else are the works he's talking about other than the works of the law that he was just explaining? It's clear faith without the works of the law is dead.
Right. And then what we focus on as Christians, before we realize what's going on here, is we focus on, well, I can't be saved by my works. So that means I shouldn't do them, because if I'm doing the works, I'm trying to be saved by them. And people just can't seem to wrap their head around that.
Yeah. No, that's the difference between justification and sanctification. The law goes in sanctification. The law will never save you. You and I, we can't be good enough to earn our salvation. It's impossible. But someone can forgive us of our sin, pay our debt, and we can start getting back on track.
Yeah.
And that grace is there, but we should never take advantage of that grace. We should never take advantage of that grace. We should try everything we can to be obedient to our Heavenly Father and do His will, do His commandments.
Yeah, we're not absolved from obeying. We're absolved from the penalty. Yeah. Good point.
There's a few other verses I really like that tell us they're verses that you just don't pick up right away. But in Acts 21, Paul was at the temple, and he said, and when they heard it, they glorified the Lord and said unto him, see, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are who believe, and they are all zealous of the law. And they are informed of you, Paul, that you teach all the Jews which are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses. So they're telling him, hey, you're telling people to forsake Moses and not get circumcised and walk after the customs and basically the Torah. What is it, therefore? The multitude must needs come together, for they will hear that you are come. Paul was a bigwig. He was someone that was someone.
We called him previously the lawyer of all lawyers.
Yeah, he was someone who knew what he was doing. So what they suggested, they said, do therefore this thing that we say to you. We have 4 men which have a vow on them. This is a Nazirite vow. Them take and purify yourself with them, and be at charges with them, that they may shave their heads, and all may know that those things whereof they were informed concerning you are nothing, but that you yourself also walk orderly and keep the law. So they said, hey, why don't you do this vow with them? Do a sacrifice even and an offering, just to show everybody that you still keep the law. What do you think Paul did? He did the vow. Then Paul took them in, and the next day, purifying himself with them, entered into the temple to signify the accomplishing of the days of purification, until that an offering should be offering for every one of them. Right here, it's direct evidence saying we should keep God's commandments. And I would even argue, it's a topic for a different time, he did an offering, he did a sacrifice after this Messiah ended all sacrifices. That doesn't make sense. But it does when you look at the Bible this way, through the eyes of a lawyer. It really will. But that's a topic for a different day.
Let's dive into that a little bit. But I mean, that's because, when we looked at this, when we were, believers before we knew all of this, it was, well, if Paul really was who we thought he was, he would have said, oh, I can't do that. Messiah was my final sacrifice. That's it. I'm not going to sacrifice. To your point, he did.
There's 4 or 5 examples in the book of Acts where the apostles, especially the apostle Paul, did sacrifices. I think we misunderstand the sacrificial system. And
Yeah.
it's a topic I thoroughly enjoy, but
well, maybe you have to
that's
come
not what this we're
We'll
here
have to
talk
have you come
about,
back
so-
sometime and talk all about that, I think.
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah.
That's my favorite topic, and I think we could go somewhere with it. But
Well, hang on.